Story 1. The Truck That Remembers Previous Drivers. I bought the used Peterbilt from an auction in Omaha for $32,000, a steal for a 2019 model with only 90,000 miles. And the first night I slept in the cab, I heard the previous driver crying in the sleeper berth, heard him begging someone to stop, heard him dying in a space that was now mine but had been his until whatever happened to him happened. I'm Gabriel Torres, 34 years old, finally able to afford my own truck after 8 years of driving for companies. And the Peterbilt 579 I'd purchased was perfect except for one detail the auction house hadn't mentioned. It remembered its previous drivers, remembered their final moments, replayed their deaths every night at 3:17 a.m. like some kind of automotive PTSD. Like the truck itself was traumatized by what had happened inside it and couldn't stop reliving the trauma. The crying started exactly at 3:17 a.m., pulling me from sleep, and at first I thought someone had broken into my truck, that an intruder was in the sleeper berth behind me. But when I turned on the light and checked, the space was empty. No one there, just my belongings and the standard sleeper equipment. Yet I could still hear the crying. Could hear a man's voice saying, "Please, please don't, I have kids, I have a wife, please." Could hear sounds of struggle, of violence, of something terrible happening in a space that showed no evidence of violence. No bloodstains or damage or any indication that someone had died here. The sounds lasted 17 minutes, escalating from crying to screaming to gurgling to silence. And then they stopped abruptly at 3:34 a.m., leaving me shaking and terrified in a truck that had just replayed a murder, that had forced me to listen to someone's final moments, that had made me an unwilling witness to death that had occurred before I owned the vehicle. I couldn't sleep after that. Drove to the nearest truck stop and used their Wi-Fi to research the truck's history, to find out what had happened to previous drivers, to understand what I'd bought without knowing. And the search results were horrifying. The Peterbilt had been owned by a driver named Marcus Webb, who'd been murdered during a robbery at a rest area in 2021, killed in his sleeper berth by someone who'd broken in looking for cash and drugs. Someone who'd stabbed Marcus 17 times while he begged for his life, while he thought about his wife and children, while he died slowly in the truck that had witnessed everything and couldn't forget. But Marcus wasn't the only previous driver. Before him, the truck had been owned by a woman named Patricia Sullivan, who died of a heart attack in the cab in 2020, alone on a highway in Montana, calling for help that arrived too late, dying while the truck recorded her final moments, her fear, her pain, her desperate attempts to reach someone who could save her. And before Patricia, the truck had belonged to a driver named Robert Chen, who'd committed suicide in the sleeper berth in 2019, depression and financial ruin and isolation combining into decision to end his life, to hang himself from the sleeper's structural supports, to die in a truck that was only 6 months old but already accumulating death, already collecting final moments, already becoming repository of trauma. The truck remembered all of them, I realized, over the following nights. Marcus at 3:17 a.m. crying and begging and dying from stab wounds. Patricia at 11:43 p.m. clutching her chest and gasping for air and calling for help that wouldn't arrive in time. Robert at 6:22 a.m. tying the rope and stepping off the bunk and swinging silently until death came. Each death replayed at its exact original time. Auditory recording stored somehow in the truck's structure, in its metal and wiring and fabric, in materials that shouldn't be capable of recording but had absorbed the trauma anyway, had become magnetic tape for human suffering, had turned the Peterbilt into playback device for previous drivers' deaths. I tried to sell the truck immediately, tried to return it to the auction house, tried to explain about the replayed deaths and traumatic memories. But the auction manager just smiled sadly and said, "All used trucks remember their previous drivers to some degree. Your Peterbilt just remembers more clearly than most. It's not grounds for return. You bought it as is, which includes whatever memories it carries. Learn to sleep through the replays or sell it yourself to someone else who'll deal with the memories. I couldn't afford to sell at a loss, couldn't take the financial hit of buying another truck, so I kept the Peterbilt and tried to adapt to its memories, tried to sleep through the nightly replays of Marcus and Patricia and Robert dying in spaces I now occupied, tried to separate their trauma from my present experience. But the memories were getting stronger, more detailed, expanding beyond just audio to include other sensory information. I started smelling the blood from Marcus's murder, started feeling the chest pain from Patricia's heart attack, started experiencing the rope's pressure around my neck during Robert's suicide. The truck wasn't just replaying their deaths, it was making me experience them, was transferring their final moments into my consciousness, was sharing trauma that shouldn't be shareable, that shouldn't be transmissible through vehicle ownership. And I started seeing them, the previous drivers, their translucent forms appearing in the cab and sleeper, going through their routines, Marcus checking his logbook before the intruder arrived, Patricia rubbing her chest hours before the heart attack hit, Robert writing his suicide note that I could now read by looking over his ghostly shoulder. I can't do this anymore. The road has taken everything. I'm sorry to whoever drives. This truck next. I'm sorry you have to be here where I ended. I'm sorry the truck will remember. Robert had known, I realized, had understood that the truck would remember, would replay, would transfer his trauma to future drivers. And he'd apologized in advance, had tried to warn me across the boundary of death, had wanted me to know that the memories weren't my fault, weren't my burden, were just unfortunate consequence of dying in a vehicle that absorbed trauma like a sponge absorbs water. The other drivers started talking to me, not through sound but through direct consciousness transfer. Their thoughts appearing in my mind like they were my own thoughts, like the boundary between us was dissolving. Marcus warned me about rest areas after dark, about strangers approaching the truck, about the moment he'd realized his kindness in unlocking the door was going to cost him his life. Patricia shared her regret about ignoring her health, about driving through warning signs, about prioritizing delivery over medical attention. Robert explained his depression, his isolation, his financial collapse, his belief that death was preferable to continued existence in a truck that was more home than his apartment, on a road that was more familiar than his family. They weren't trying to haunt me, I understood. They were trying to warn me, to prevent me from making their mistakes, to use their deaths as lessons that might keep me alive. The truck was transferring their memories not as curse, but as protection, not as trauma, but as education, giving me access to their experiences so I could avoid their fates. But experiencing 3 people's deaths nightly was destroying me, fragmenting my identity, making me uncertain which memories were mine and which were theirs, which fears were Gabriel Torres's fears, and which were inherited trauma from Marcus, Patricia, and Robert. I was becoming composite person, mixture of 4 drivers' experiences, collective consciousness sharing one body, one truck, one life. I sought help from a therapist who specialized in occupational trauma, explained about the truck that remembers, about the nightly replays, about the dissolving boundary between previous drivers and current driver. She diagnosed me with severe PTSD complicated by what she called empathetic trauma absorption, experiencing trauma secondhand so intensely that it became functionally identical to experiencing it firsthand. You need to get rid of the truck, she said. The memories are destroying you. You're experiencing 3 people's deaths plus your own life simultaneously. Your consciousness can't sustain that. Sell the truck, take the financial loss, save your sanity. But I couldn't sell the truck to someone else, couldn't pass the traumatic memories to another unsuspecting driver who'd buy the Peterbilt and experience what I was experiencing, who'd hear Marcus and Patricia and Robert dying, who'd absorb their trauma, who'd become composite person like I'd become. So I kept the truck and learned to live with the memories, learned to treat Marcus and Patricia and Robert as companions rather than hauntings, as fellow drivers sharing the cab rather than ghosts replaying deaths. And gradually the replays became less traumatic, became more like stories being told, became educational rather than horrifying. Marcus taught me about security, about being cautious, about never opening the door without verifying who's outside. Patricia taught me about health, about listening to warning signs, about prioritizing medical attention over delivery schedules. Robert taught me about mental health, about reaching out for help, about understanding that isolation and financial stress are problems with solutions that don't involve suicide. I've been driving the Peterbilt for 2 years now, and I still hear the replays nightly, still experience the deaths, still share consciousness with 3 previous drivers who died in this truck. But I'm no longer terrified, no longer traumatized, no longer fragmenting under the weight of multiple memories. I'm Gabriel Torres, and I'm Marcus Webb, and I'm Patricia Sullivan, and I'm Robert Chen. I'm composite driver, collective consciousness, 4 people sharing one life, one truck, one road, and when I die someday, hopefully from old age, hopefully not in this truck, I'll join the memories, will become 4th replay, will share my experiences with whoever owns the Peterbilt next. We'll try to teach them what I learned. We'll try to keep them alive through lessons purchased with deaths of previous drivers. The truck that remembers previous drivers is still on the road, still replaying nightly at 3:17 a.m. and 11:43 p.m. and 6:22 a.m. Still sharing trauma, still transferring memories, still creating composite consciousness from sequence of drivers who've occupied the cab. If you buy a used truck and hear strange sounds at night, if you experience memories that aren't yours, if previous drivers make themselves known through replays and consciousness transfer, don't panic. Don't sell the truck immediately. Listen to what they're trying to teach you. Learn from their mistakes. Let them protect you through their deaths. The truck that remembers is trying to keep you alive by showing you how others died. Honor the memories. Learn the lessons. Survive where they didn't. And someday, when you join the memories, try to teach the next driver. Try to keep them safe. Try to make your death meaningful by preventing theirs. The truck remembers. Always remembers. And that's a gift, not a curse, if you're willing to learn from the dead. Story 2. The rest area that trades futures. The sign outside the rest area read, "Destiny Exchange, trade your future, fair rates." And I was curious enough, desperate enough, dissatisfied enough with the trajectory of my life to pull in and discover what a rest area meant by trading futures, by advertising destiny as exchangeable commodity. I'm Lisa Brennan, 42 years old, hauling office equipment from Seattle to Minneapolis. Recently divorced, estranged from my daughter, facing medical diagnosis that suggested my future would be short and painful. And the Destiny Exchange offered something I desperately wanted. The possibility of trading my future for someone else's, of exchanging my trajectory for different path, of becoming someone whose destiny was more appealing than mine. The facility looked like any rest area, parking spaces, bathrooms, vending machines, but with one additional building that normal rest areas didn't have. A glass structure labeled Exchange Center where people sat at terminals apparently browsing futures, shopping for destinies, comparing their trajectories against alternatives and making trades when they found futures they preferred to their own. I entered the Exchange Center and a clerk greeted me. Young man with expression suggesting he'd made this pitch hundreds of times. "Welcome to Destiny Exchange. Would you like to browse available futures? We have thousands in our database, all traded by people looking for different destinies, all available for exchange if you find one that appeals to you more than your current trajectory." "How does this work?" I asked, skepticism mixing with desperate hope that this impossible service might actually function. might actually offer escape from future I didn't want to experience. Simple, he explained, gesturing to a terminal. You sit here, we scan your current destiny trajectory, and you can see your future. Major events, life expectancy, relationship status, financial situation, health outcomes, everything predictable about where your life is heading. Then you browse our database of traded futures, find one you prefer, and we execute the exchange. You get their future, they get yours. Both parties wake up tomorrow on different trajectories, different destinies, different paths. He led me to a terminal that looked like a medical scanning device combined with a computer interface. I sat in the chair and the machine hummed to life, projecting three-dimensional display of my future. Dying of cancer at age 47 after 3 years of painful treatment. Dying estranged from my daughter who never forgave me for the divorce. Dying with $47,000 in medical debt and no one attending my funeral except the funeral home director. It was devastating, seeing my future laid out with such clinical precision, seeing the trajectory that awaited me if I continued on my current path. Seeing confirmation that my fears about illness and isolation were accurate predictions rather than paranoid anxieties. Would you like to browse alternatives? The clerk asked gently, and I nodded, too shaken to speak, too horrified by my own future to do anything except search desperately for different destiny. The database contained thousands of futures traded by people who, like me, were dissatisfied with their trajectories and hoping for better alternatives. I browsed through them, a future where I lived to 78 but remained financially struggling. A future where I was wealthy but alone. A future where I reconciled with my daughter but died in a car accident at 53. Then I found it. A future that was better in every measurable way. Living to 84 in good health, reconciling with my daughter within 2 years, finding new romantic relationship at age 50, achieving financial stability through career change, dying peacefully surrounded by family. It was everything my current future wasn't, everything I wanted, everything I'd given up on having. This one, I said, pointing to the perfect future. I want to trade for this one. The clerk checked the listing and frowned slightly. This future was traded by a woman named Sarah Mitchell, age 37, currently in excellent health, good career, strong family relationships. She traded her future because she found it boring, predictable, safe. She wanted adventure, risk, uncertainty. The future she traded for was... Actually, she traded for your future, Ms. Brennan. Sarah Mitchell wanted a future with more intensity, more drama, more meaning through suffering. She found your trajectory appealing specifically because it included struggle, illness, difficulty. She thought it would be more authentic than her comfortable destiny. I was taking Sarah Mitchell's perfect future, and she was taking my terrible one, by choice, deliberately thinking that suffering and illness and early death were somehow more meaningful than health and longevity and peaceful end. It seemed insane, seemed like terrible decision, but the clerk assured me both parties had to consent to trades, that Sarah had chosen my future knowing what it contained, that she wanted intensity and authenticity more than comfort and safety. Do you consent to the exchange? The clerk asked, pulling up a contract on the screen. Once executed, the trade is permanent. You'll wake tomorrow on Sarah Mitchell's trajectory. She'll wake on yours. Neither of you can reverse the exchange. Your destinies are swapped permanently. I signed the contract without reading the fine print, too desperate to escape my future to worry about hidden clauses or unexpected consequences. The machine hummed louder, lights flashing, and I felt something shift inside me. Felt my trajectory bending. Felt my future changing from the path I'd been on to the path Sarah Mitchell had abandoned. I slept in my truck that night and woke the next morning feeling different, feeling lighter, feeling like something fundamental had changed. And over the following weeks, the traded future manifested exactly as the terminal had predicted. I received job offer that led to career change. I reached out to my daughter and we began reconciliation process. I met someone at a conference who would eventually become my partner. I visited a doctor and tests came back clear. No cancer, no terminal illness, just clean bill of health and projection of long life ahead. Sarah Mitchell's future had become mine, and everything was better. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly what the destiny exchange had promised. But I started experiencing memories that weren't mine. Memories from Sarah Mitchell's life before the trade, her childhood, her relationships, her experiences. And I realized the trade hadn't just exchanged futures. It had begun exchanging pasts, personalities, identities. I was becoming Sarah Mitchell gradually, absorbing her history, adopting her preferences, losing my own identity to the woman whose destiny I'd taken. Within 6 months, I was more Sarah than Lisa, remembered her childhood more clearly than my own, preferred her favorite foods and music and hobbies over the ones I'd had before the trade. My daughter noticed the change, commented that I seemed like a different person, that she was reconciling with someone who wasn't quite her mother anymore, who looked like Lisa Brennan but acted like someone else. I tried to contact the destiny exchange, tried to reverse the trade or at least stop the identity blending. But when I returned to the rest area where the facility had been, there was nothing there. Just standard rest area with no exchange center, no clerk, no destiny trading service. And I realized the trade was permanent not just in terms of future but in terms of identity. That taking Sarah Mitchell's destiny meant becoming Sarah Mitchell. That trading futures meant trading selves. That I'd sold Lisa Brennan for comfortable life and was now living as Sarah Mitchell in Lisa Brennan's body with Lisa Brennan's legal identity but Sarah Mitchell's personality, memories, and future. And somewhere Sarah Mitchell was living my traded future, experiencing the cancer and struggle and early death, but she was doing it as Lisa Brennan gradually, absorbing my identity, becoming me while I became her. The trade executing fully over time, swapping not just our destinies but our complete selves. I am Lisa Brennan legally but Sarah Mitchell experientially, living comfortable future in body and life that originally belonged to someone else. Carrying memories and identity traded from woman who wanted intensity more than comfort, who chose struggle over safety, who took my terrible future deliberately while I took her perfect one. The rest area that trades futures is still there somewhere, still facilitating exchanges, still letting people trade destinies without fully explaining that trading futures means trading identities, that you don't just get someone else's trajectory. You become someone else, gradually, completely, permanently. If you see a rest area advertising destiny exchange, if you're tempted to trade your future for better alternative, understand the complete cost. You'll get the future you want, but you'll lose the person you are. You'll become whoever's destiny you take, will absorb their identity, will cease being yourself while living the life you chose. I chose Sarah Mitchell's perfect future, and I got it. But I paid by ceasing to be Lisa Brennan, by becoming Sarah Mitchell, by trading not just my destiny but myself. The rest area that trades futures is waiting for people desperate enough to trade, dissatisfied enough to exchange, willing enough to become someone else if it means escaping who they are. I made the trade. I got the future I wanted. I lost myself in the process. Choose carefully. Trade cautiously. Understand that destiny exchange means identity exchange, that better future comes at cost of current self, that you might get everything you want but lose everything you are. I am Sarah Mitchell living as Lisa Brennan, experiencing traded future and traded identity, living comfortable life I didn't earn in body I don't own anymore, carrying destiny purchased by becoming someone else. The rest area that trades futures is waiting. The exchange is available. The trade is permanent. Choose carefully. you might get exactly what you want and lose yourself completely. Story 3. The highway that runs on fear. Interstate 66 appeared on my GPS as a shortcut that would save 3 hours, and I took the exit despite never having heard of this highway before. Despite the designation being impossible because there are only even numbers for east-west interstates and odd numbers for north-south routes, despite something about the name suggesting this was road I shouldn't travel. I'm Thomas Wade, 53 years old, hauling frozen foods from Chicago to Nashville, and the highway that runs on fear consumed my terror for 200 miles, grew stronger and more real with every mile I drove while I grew weaker and less substantial. My fear literally fueling the road's existence, my anxiety becoming pavement, my dread becoming mile markers, my terror becoming the highway itself. The road surface looked normal at first. Standard interstate construction, 2 lanes each direction, center median, mile markers counting up from 0. But the landscape around the highway was wrong, was constantly shifting, was manifesting whatever I feared most at any given moment, creating real physical manifestations of anxiety, dread, and terror that appeared alongside the road like roadside attractions designed specifically to frighten me. At mile marker 17, I passed a crashed truck that looked exactly like mine. Same model, same company logo, same cargo, and through the shattered windshield I could see a body that looked exactly like me. Thomas Wade dead in a collision that hadn't happened yet, but that the highway was showing me as possibility, as potential future, as outcome that might occur if my fear became strong enough to manifest it completely. At mile marker 34, my deceased father stood on the shoulder waving at me, looking exactly as he had the day he died, and I knew this wasn't real, wasn't actually his ghost, was just the highway creating manifestation of my fear of mortality, of my unresolved grief, of my guilt about missing his final days because I was on a delivery that couldn't wait. At mile marker 51, I passed a billboard showing my bank account balance dropping to 0, showing my house being foreclosed, showing my family homeless and hungry, manifestation of my financial anxiety, my fear of failure, my dread of being unable to provide for the people depending on me. The highway was reading my fears and manifesting them, I realized, was creating physical representations of my anxieties, was making my internal terror external and visible, was feeding on my psychological state and using it to construct the road itself, to maintain its existence, to grow stronger and more real with every frightened thought I had. And I could feel it draining me. Feel my fear being extracted like the highway was siphon pulling anxiety from my consciousness and converting it into pavement, into signs, into manifestations. The more I feared, the more solid the highway became, the more substantial the manifestations appeared, the more real Interstate 666 seemed. I tried to exit, to find an off-ramp, to leave this impossible highway, but every exit I approached vanished as I got close, dissolving into unreality, proving to be illusion created by the highway to prevent my escape, to keep me traveling, to continue extracting fear and converting it into fuel for the road's existence. My CB radio crackled with voices of other drivers trapped on Interstate 666. All of us traveling simultaneously, all experiencing manifestations of our individual fears, all being drained by a highway that ran on terror, that consumed anxiety, that existed only because frightened drivers fueled it with their fear. I've been on this highway for 6 years, one voice said, exhausted, resigned. I entered when I was 37, I'm 43 now, I've driven thousands of miles in circles and the highway keeps manifesting my fears, keeps draining my terror, keeps using me as fuel. I'm almost empty now. Almost nothing left to extract. When my fear runs out completely, I think I'll disappear, become part of the highway, dissolve into pavement made of extracted anxiety. Other voices confirmed similar experiences. Drivers who'd been trapped for years, decades, driving endlessly on Interstate 666 while the highway consumed their fear and manifested their anxieties. All of us fuel for impossible road that shouldn't exist but did exist because enough frightened people had traveled it, had fed it with their terror, had made it real through collective anxiety. The manifestations were getting more elaborate, more personal, more precisely targeted to my specific fears. At mile marker 87, I passed a hospital where my wife was dying of disease I couldn't prevent. Manifestation of my fear of losing her, of being helpless, of watching someone I love suffer while I could do nothing. At mile marker 112, I passed a prison where I was incarcerated for crime I didn't commit. Manifestation of my fear of injustice, of false accusation, of punishment without guilt. Each manifestation drained more fear from me, extracted more anxiety, pulled more terror from my consciousness, and converted it into highway infrastructure, into physical reality made from psychological distress. And I was getting emptier, feeling hollower, becoming less substantial as the highway consumed my emotional energy and grew more solid, more real, more permanent. By mile marker 147, I'd been drained so thoroughly that I was becoming translucent, could see through my own hands, could feel my physical form weakening as the highway absorbed my fear and used it to reinforce its existence. I was dissolving into the road, becoming part of Interstate 666, converting from frightened driver into pavement made of extracted terror. The CB voices were all around me now, dozens of drivers in various stages of dissolution, all of us being consumed by highway that ran on fear, all of us fuel for impossible road. And I understood that this was Interstate 6666's purpose, its function, its nature. It existed to extract fear from travelers, to drain them of anxiety, to consume their terror until nothing remained except empty husks that became part of the pavement, part of the mile markers, part of the highway infrastructure. At mile marker 173, I saw the exit, finally, the way off Interstate 666 marked, fear exhaustion, empty drivers exit here. And I understood this was the end, the final off-ramp. The place where drivers who'd been completely drained by the highway were expelled, released, discarded as empty husks that no longer contained terror worth extracting. I took the exit because I had no choice, because I was empty, because the highway had extracted every fear I possessed and converted it into 200 miles of pavement made from my anxiety, from my dread, from my terror. The off-ramp led to nowhere, to empty space, to void where discarded drivers went after the highway finished consuming their fear. I am Thomas Wade, 53 years old, driver who traveled Interstate 66 and was drained completely, was emptied of fear and anxiety and terror, was converted into pavement and then expelled as used-up husk. I exist now in the void where empty drivers go, waiting for fear to regenerate, waiting for anxiety to return, waiting until I have enough terror accumulated to interest the highway again, to fuel another journey on Interstate 666, to repeat the cycle of extraction and dissolution. Other drivers are here with me, hundreds of us, thousands maybe, all drained by the highway, all waiting for fear to return, all destined to eventually travel Interstate 666 again because the highway calls to us, draws us back, needs our fear to continue existing, needs our anxiety to maintain its reality, needs our terror to fuel its impossible existence. The highway that runs on fear is still there, still appearing as shortcut on GPS, still attracting drivers who don't understand what it is, still draining fear and converting it into pavement, still growing longer and more substantial with every frightened traveler, still consuming anxiety and manifesting it as physical infrastructure. If your GPS shows Interstate 66 as available route, If the highway appears offering impossible time savings, if you see the entrance ramp despite having no memory of this road existing before, don't take it. Don't travel the highway that runs on fear. Don't let your anxiety become fuel for impossible road, your terror become pavement, your dread become mile markers. The highway that runs on fear is waiting for frightened drivers, for anxious travelers, for people carrying enough terror to extract, enough anxiety to consume, enough dread to convert into miles of pavement that shouldn't exist but does exist because we made it real with our fear. I traveled Interstate 66. I was drained completely. I became part of the highway that runs on fear. My anxiety converted into pavement. My terror becoming miles of impossible road, my dread fueling existence of highway that consumes fear and grows stronger with every frightened driver who makes the mistake of taking the exit, of traveling the shortcut, of feeding the road that runs on fear. Don't be like me. Don't travel Interstate 66. Don't let your fear become fuel for impossible highway. The road is waiting. The highway runs on fear. And fear is always available, always renewable, always ready to be extracted and converted into pavement made from terror, into mile markers made from anxiety, into highway made from collective dread. I am empty driver in the void, waiting for fear to return, waiting to travel Interstate 6 again, waiting to be drained again, eternally cycling between fear generation and fear extraction, between accumulation and consumption, between being frightened traveler and being fuel for highway that runs on fear. Story 4. The logbook that writes itself. My electronic logbook started filling itself in with entries I hadn't made, documenting trips I hadn't driven, recording hours I hadn't logged, and when I checked the dates and routes, I realized the logbook was documenting my future, was recording trips I would take days or weeks from now, was creating mandatory itinerary I had no choice but to follow because the logbook had already recorded it as historical fact. I'm Derek Paulson, 47 years old, been driving for 23 years, and the logbook that writes itself had somehow gained access to my future timeline, was documenting it in advance, was turning my forthcoming days into historical records before I lived them, creating predetermined schedule I couldn't deviate from without causing temporal paradox, without making the logbook's entries false, without breaking causality in ways that seemed increasingly dangerous. The first self-generated entry appeared on November 3rd, documenting a trip I would supposedly take on November 8th. Depart Kansas City at 06:00. Drive to Omaha. Deliver cargo at 14:30. Return to Kansas City at 22:15. Total miles 374, total hours 16:25. I hadn't received any dispatch for November 8th, hadn't been assigned any Omaha delivery, hadn't agreed to drive that day, but the logbook insisted it was already historical fact. Already completed trip. Already part of my documented past, even though it was still 5 days in my future. I called my dispatcher to verify whether I actually had an Omaha delivery scheduled, and she confirmed. Yes, we were just about to call you. Last-minute booking, pickup in Kansas City on November 8th at 6 a.m., deliver to Omaha by mid-afternoon, return that evening. Are you available? The logbook had predicted it, had documented it before it was assigned, had known 5 days in advance what trip I'd take, what time I'd leave, what time I'd arrive. And when I actually drove the Omaha route on November 8th, every detail matched the logbook's advance entry exactly. Departure time, arrival time, mileage, hours, all identical to what had been recorded 5 days earlier. The logbook was predicting my future with perfect accuracy, I realized, was documenting trips before I took them, was creating historical records of forthcoming events, was somehow accessing my timeline and recording it in advance. And the predictions were becoming more detailed, more comprehensive, expanding beyond simple trip logistics to include personal details, emotional states, complications, and difficulties. November 14th, Depart Denver at 05:30. Tire blowout at mile marker 267. Delay, 2.3 hours. Arrive Phoenix at 1947. Argument with delivery supervisor regarding late arrival. Compensation reduced by $150. Emotional state, angry, frustrated, resentful. Sleep quality, poor. Blood pressure, elevated. Physical health, declining. The entry documented everything about November 14th, including the tire blowout I couldn't prevent because the logbook had already recorded it as historical fact, including the argument I couldn't avoid because the logbook had already documented it happening, including the poor sleep and elevated blood pressure that were predetermined, already recorded, already part of my documented past, even though November 14th was still 10 days away. I tried to prevent the predictions, tried to change the predetermined timeline, tried to make the logbook's entries false by choosing different actions. On November 14th, I checked my tires carefully before departing, verified they were in perfect condition, determined to avoid the predicted blowout. But at mile marker 267, exactly as the logbook had documented, one tire blew out catastrophically, causing the delay, causing the late arrival, causing the argument with the delivery supervisor, causing everything the logbook had recorded in advance. The future was fixed, I realized, was predetermined, was already documented in my logbook regardless of my attempts to change it. The self-writing entries weren't predictions I could avoid. They were historical records of unchangeable timeline, documentation of future that was as fixed as past, as inevitable as events that had already occurred. And the entries were becoming darker, were documenting future events I desperately wanted to avoid. December 7th, routine physical examination. Diagnosis, late-stage pancreatic cancer. Prognosis, 4 to 6 months survival. Treatment options limited. Emotional state, shock, denial, despair. Life plans disrupted. Future outlook, terminal. The logbook had documented my death sentence, had recorded my diagnosis before it occurred, had made my terminal illness part of historical record before I experienced symptoms, before doctors detected anything, before I had any indication that cancer was growing inside me. I canceled the December 7th physical, refused to go, determined to prove the logbook wrong, to demonstrate that future wasn't fixed, that self-writing entries could be prevented. But on December 7th, I experienced severe abdominal pain, collapsed, was taken to emergency room where doctors ran tests and confirmed late-stage pancreatic cancer, 4 to 6 months survival, limited treatment options exactly as the logbook had documented weeks earlier. The logbook's predictions were absolute, were unchangeable, were historical facts recorded in advance. And I couldn't avoid them, couldn't prevent them, couldn't alter my timeline because it was already documented, already fixed, already completed in logbook that had access to my future and recorded it with same certainty as it recorded my past. Further entries appeared documenting my remaining months. January 23rd. Chemotherapy begins. Effectiveness, minimal. Side effects, severe. Physical condition, rapidly declining. Emotional state, accepting, resigned, making final arrangements. February 14th, final delivery. Kansas City to Omaha. Last time operating commercial vehicle. Physical ability, marginal. Emotional state, nostalgic, grieving, saying goodbye to profession, to truck, to life on road. March 9th, admitted to hospice care. Pain management initiated. Family contacted. Final days approaching. Physical condition, terminal. Emotional state, peaceful, ready, grateful for time remaining. March 27th, death. Time, 03:47 a.m. Location, hospice facility, Kansas City. Cause, pancreatic cancer, multiple organ, failure. Age at death, 47 years, 5 months, 12 days. Final thoughts. No entry recorded. Subject deceased. The logbook had documented my complete remaining timeline, had recorded every significant event from diagnosis to death. had created historical account of my final months before I lived them, had made my death as certain and documented as my birth, as fixed and unchangeable as any event that had already occurred. I am Derek Paulson, 47 years old, living through timeline documented in advance by logbook that writes itself, experiencing predetermined future recorded as historical fact following itinerary I can't deviate from because the logbook has already documented it happening. I'm currently in late January undergoing chemotherapy documented in the logbook, experiencing side effects recorded in advance, following script written by my own future transformed into historical record. I know how many days I have remaining because the logbook has documented them. I know when I'll make my final delivery because it's already recorded. I know when I'll die because the logbook has logged it with same precision it logs every trip, every hour, every mile. The logbook that writes itself is still documenting my future, still converting forthcoming events into historical records, still creating mandatory itinerary for remaining weeks of my predetermined life. And I'm following it exactly, unable to deviate, unable to change what's already been documented, unable to alter timeline that's as fixed as past, as certain as events that occurred years ago. If your electronic logbook starts filling itself in with entries you haven't made, if it documents trips you haven't taken, if it records future as historical fact, understand that you're seeing your predetermined timeline, your fixed future, your unchangeable fate. Don't try to prevent it. The logbook's entries are absolute, are inevitable, are as certain as gravity. I tried to change my future. The logbook's predictions remained accurate. I tried to avoid my diagnosis. The cancer appeared exactly as documented. I tried to alter my timeline. The logbook's entries proved unchangeable. The logbook that writes itself is documenting your future, recording it as historical fact, creating mandatory itinerary you'll follow exactly whether you want to or not, whether you try to change it or not, whether you accept it or not. My logbook says I have 61 days remaining until documented death on March 27th at 03:47 a.m. I believe the logbook. It's never been wrong. It documents the future with same accuracy it documents the past. And I'm living through my final documented entries following timeline recorded in advance, approaching death logged in my electronic logbook as certain historical fact that just happens to be located slightly in my future rather than my past. The logbook that writes itself is still writing, still documenting, still recording future as past, forthcoming as historical yet to occur as already completed. And I'm following every entry exactly. Unable to deviate, unable to change, unable to make the logbook wrong about anything, including the date and time of my documented death. 61 days remaining according to logbook. 61 days until final entry. 61 days until historical record catches up to present moment and records my death as completed event, as past occurrence, as documented fact in logbook that wrote itself, that documented my future, that made my remaining days into historical records before I lived them. The logbook that writes itself is never wrong. Never. Story 5. The convoy of identical trucks. They appeared in my mirrors outside Amarillo, 17 trucks perfectly identical to mine. Same model Freightliner, same year, same color, same company logo, same everything. And when I tried to change lanes, they changed lanes. When I accelerated, they accelerated. When I signaled, they signaled, all moving in perfect synchronization like they were reflections or copies or somehow connected to my truck through invisible linkage that forced them to match my every movement. I'm Sandra Martinez, 39 years old, hauling electronics from Dallas to Los Angeles, and the convoy of identical trucks followed me for 800 miles, replicated every action I took, became perfect mirror of my driving, and I never learned what they were or why they appeared or where they came from. But by the time I reached Los Angeles, I understood they weren't following me. They were me. Copies or echoes or versions of Sandra Martinez from parallel timelines, all driving the same route simultaneously, all existing in same space, all synchronized perfectly because we were fundamentally the same person making the same choices at the same moments. The first truck appeared at mile marker 127, suddenly visible in my left mirror, pulling even with my position, maintaining exact distance. I assumed it was coincidence, assumed another driver happened to be operating the same truck model, happened to be traveling the same highway, happened to accelerate at the same moment I did. But then the second truck appeared on my right, also identical, also matching my speed precisely, and when I slowed slightly to test, both trucks slowed by exactly the same amount, maintaining perfect position. By mile marker 145, there were 8 identical trucks surrounding mine, forming octagon with me at the center, all moving together, all changing lanes simultaneously, all signaling and braking and accelerating in perfect unison. By mile marker 167, there were 17 trucks, a larger formation still centered on me, still matching my every movement with precision that shouldn't be possible unless they were somehow reading my inputs directly, unless they were connected to my steering wheel and accelerator and brake pedal through quantum entanglement or supernatural linkage or whatever impossible connection synchronized our movements. I tried the CB radio, tried to contact the other drivers, tried to ask why they were following me, why they were synchronized to my movements. But every channel was filled with my own voice, 17 versions of Sandra Martinez, all speaking simultaneously, all saying the same words at the same moment, all asking the same questions, all confused by the same phenomenon. "This is Sandra Martinez," we all said together, our voices overlapping into strange harmonic chord. "Why are you following me? Why are we moving together? What's causing this synchronization?" And we all realized simultaneously, they weren't following me. We were all following the same path because we were the same person, same driver, same choices, same timeline split into 17 simultaneous versions that were experiencing the same journey from slightly different perspectives but making identical decisions because we were fundamentally identical, were copies or echoes or parallel versions of Sandra Martinez, all driving from Dallas to Los Angeles at the same time. The realization should have been comforting, should have explained the phenomenon, should have reduced my anxiety, but instead it raised terrifying questions. If there were 17 versions of me driving identical trucks on identical routes making identical choices, were we all real? Were we all equally original? Or was I the real Sandra Martinez while the others were copies? And if we were copies, what happened to the original? Was there an original Sandra Martinez somewhere? Or were we all copies of copies of copies, replicating endlessly with no source template, no authentic original from which the echoes emerged? The convoy drove through New Mexico and Arizona, 17 identical trucks moving together, synchronized perfectly, and I started noticing small differences between versions, tiny variations that suggested we weren't perfectly identical after all. One truck had slightly more road dust on its trailer. Another had a CB antenna angled differently. A third had a barely visible dent in the front bumper. The differences were microscopic but significant, suggesting that while we'd started identical, we were diverging, experiencing slightly different micro-events that accumulated into variation, transforming from perfect copies into related but distinct versions. And the divergence was accelerating. By Flagstaff, the differences were clearly visible. Trucks showing different wear patterns, different levels of fuel, different positioning in the formation. By Barstow, some trucks were pulling ahead, others falling behind. The perfect synchronization breaking down as the Sandra Martinez versions made slightly different choices, responded to slightly different stimuli, became increasingly distinct individuals despite starting as identical copies. And trucks were disappearing, I noticed, the convoy shrinking from 17 to 14 to 11 to 8. The versions were collapsing, I realized, unsuccessful timelines ending, failed Sandra Martinez branches terminating, quantum probability eliminating unsuccessful outcomes and consolidating around more stable versions. By the time I reached Los Angeles, only 3 trucks remained, mine and 2 others still identical but now clearly distinct. 3 Sandra Martinez versions that had survived the collapse. 3 timelines that had proven stable enough to persist. 3 quantum outcomes that represented most probable futures for person who started as single driver in Dallas, but multiplied into 17 simultaneous versions that traveled together until probability collapsed and eliminated 14 possibilities. The 2 remaining identical trucks drove to different delivery addresses, and I never saw them again. Never learned which Sandra Martinez I was. The original, a copy, or one of 3 equally valid quantum outcomes that persisted after collapse eliminated less probable versions. I am Sandra Martinez, 39 years old, and I may be the original, or maybe a copy, or maybe quantum probability outcome that survived collapse of 17 simultaneous timelines. I don't know which. Can't know which. The convoy of identical trucks taught me that identity is less certain than I believed, that there may be multiple versions of me existing simultaneously. That Sandra Martinez might be single person or might be quantum probability cloud that occasionally collapses into specific outcomes. Sometimes I see trucks identical to mine on the highway. Wonder if there are other Sandra Martinez versions, other quantum outcomes that didn't collapse, other timelines where I made slightly different choices and became slightly different person but still drive the same truck on the same routes carrying the same cargo. The convoy of identical trucks appears randomly, multiple versions of same driver suddenly synchronized, traveling together until probability collapses and eliminates unsuccessful timelines. If you see identical trucks surrounding yours matching your movements, synchronized to your actions, don't panic. You're experiencing quantum probability collapse, multiple versions of yourself existing simultaneously until reality decides which outcomes survive and which timelines terminate. Most versions won't make it. Most Sandra Martinez trucks disappeared before Los Angeles. Most quantum outcomes collapse into non-existence, eliminated by probability that favors certain timelines over others. But some survive. Some make it to destination. Some become the version that persists while others cease to exist. I survived the convoy, arrived in Los Angeles, became one of 3 Sandra Martinez versions that persisted after 14 others collapsed. And I wonder every day whether I'm the original or a copy, whether the real Sandra Martinez disappeared during the collapse, and I'm just quantum probability outcome that thinks it's the original person, that carries memories and identity of someone who may have ceased to exist when timelines consolidated. The convoy of identical trucks is quantum phenomenon, probability collapse, multiple timelines existing simultaneously until reality decides which outcomes survive. If it happens to you, drive carefully. Make good choices. Survive the collapse. Become the version that persists when others terminate. I am Sandra Martinez, or I'm a version of Sandra Martinez, or I'm quantum probability outcome that survived when 17 possibilities collapsed into 3 survivors. I don't know which. Can't know which. The convoy taught me that identity is uncertain, that originality is questionable, that I may be copy or echo or quantum outcome rather than authentic individual. But I'm still driving. Still delivering, still existing as Sandra Martinez, whether I'm original or copy or probability outcome. The convoy of identical trucks is still appearing, still synchronizing, still collapsing into fewer versions until only survivors remain. And I'm a survivor. I persisted. I made it to Los Angeles while 14 other Sandra Martinez versions collapsed into non-existence. That's enough. That's all I can know. That's all anyone can know when they survive the convoy of identical trucks, when they persist while other versions collapse, when they become the quantum outcome that continues while alternatives terminate. I am Sandra Martinez. I am a survivor. I am whichever version persisted. And that's enough. Story 6. The parking lot that loops time. I pulled into the truck stop parking lot at 11:17 p.m. to get some rest, found an empty space in the back row, shut down my engine and prepared for sleep. And when I woke, what felt like 8 hours later, my clock showed 11:24 p.m. 7 minutes had passed instead of 8 hours, and I'd somehow experienced full night's sleep in 7 subjective minutes while trapped in parking lot that loops time, that creates temporal bubbles where internal duration doesn't match external progression, where you can sleep for hours or days or weeks while the outside world advances only minutes or seconds. I'm Robert Chen, 56 years old, hauling construction materials from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, and the parking lot that loops time gave me the rest I desperately needed while barely advancing the clock. But it also trapped me there for what I eventually calculated as 17 subjective years compressed into 43 external minutes. 17 years I lived inside temporal loop while the real world advanced less than an hour. 17 years of aging and experience in isolation that happened in parking space at truck stop, where time ran at different rate inside the boundary than outside the perimeter. I thought it was hallucination at first, thought my exhaustion had caused me to misperceive the time, thought I'd just closed my eyes for a few minutes and dreamed I'd slept for 8 hours. But I felt genuinely rested, felt like I'd slept deeply and thoroughly, felt physically restored in ways that 7 minutes of rest couldn't provide. And when I checked my logbook, my body's condition, my growth of facial hair, everything suggested 8 hours had passed, not 7 minutes, that I'd experienced full night's rest even though the clock insisted almost no time had elapsed. I started my truck and tried to leave the parking lot, but when I reached the exit I found myself back at my parking space, having driven in circles somehow, having completed full loop through the lot that returned me to starting point. I tried again, followed different path, deliberately turned opposite directions, but every attempt to exit resulted in return to my parking space. Like the parking lot was Mobius strip. Like the space itself was curved in ways that prevented departure, that made every path lead back to beginning. The truck stop employees I saw through the window looked frozen, weren't moving, were suspended in mid-gesture like time had stopped for them while continuing normally for me. And I realized I was trapped in temporal bubble, in space where time ran differently, where internal duration was decoupled from external progression, where I could experience hours while seconds passed outside, where the parking lot created loop that prevented escape while subjectively time continued forward. I got out of my truck and walked around the parking lot, testing the boundaries, searching for exit that would actually lead out instead of looping back to start. And I found other drivers, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all trapped in the same temporal bubble, all experiencing the same impossible time dilation, all unable to leave the parking lot that loops time. "How long have you been here?" I asked an elderly driver sitting on the bumper of his ancient truck, and he looked at me with expression of exhausted resignation. 37 years, he said. 37 subjective years inside this parking lot. I pulled in when I was 42, I'm 79 now. I've lived 37 years trying to escape while external time advanced maybe 2 hours. My family thinks I disappeared, thinks I abandoned them, has probably given up searching, but I've been here the whole time, trapped in temporal loop, aging and experiencing decades while the world outside advanced barely at all. Other drivers shared similar stories, trapped for years, for decades, for entire lifetimes inside parking lot that looped time, that created bubble where internal duration was stretched infinitely while external progression remained minimal. Some had been trapped since the 50s, had lived 70 subjective years while external world advanced only few hours, had aged from young men into elderly individuals while their families, their jobs, their entire Lives outside the bubble remained frozen at the moment they'd pulled into parking lot. "Why does this happen?" I asked. And a woman who'd been trapped for 53 years explained, "The truck stop was built on temporal anomaly, on space where time doesn't flow normally, where duration is flexible. The parking lot creates bubble where internal time can stretch infinitely while external time barely advances. We're trapped in the bubble, experiencing stretched duration, aging and living while the outside world remains effectively frozen relative to our experience." I tried everything to escape. Drove different routes through the parking lot, walked to the boundary and tried to cross on foot, even attempted to crash through the exit barrier thinking physical force might break the temporal loop. But every attempt resulted in return to starting position. Every path curved back to my parking space. Every exit looped into entrance. The parking lot's geometry folded in impossible ways that made escape impossible, that made the temporal bubble inescapable. Days passed inside the bubble, then weeks, then months. I aged, grew beard, experienced passage of time normally from my perspective while watching the frozen truck stop employees remain suspended in same positions. While seeing the clock outside the bubble advance by minutes while I experienced weeks. While being trapped in parking lot that stretched my duration infinitely while compressing it to almost nothing externally. I formed community with other trapped drivers. We shared food and stories and strategies for maintaining sanity while experiencing temporal imprisonment, while living stretched lives in parking lot bubble. Some drivers had been trapped so long they'd forgotten their original lives, had experienced more years inside the bubble than they'd lived before entering it, had become permanent residents of temporal anomaly rather than temporary victims trying to escape. At 17 subjective years, I stopped trying to escape, accepted that parking lot that loops time had claimed me permanently, settled into stretched existence where I would age normally, would experience full human lifespan, would die eventually inside temporal bubble while external world advanced only hours, while my family and job and life outside the bubble remained frozen relative to my experience. But at 17 years and 41 minutes subjective time, 43 minutes external time, the bubble collapsed, the temporal loop ended, and I found myself able to leave, able to drive out of parking lot, able to escape temporal anomaly that had trapped me and hundreds of other drivers in stretched duration. I don't know why the bubble collapsed, why after trapping drivers for decades it suddenly released us, why the parking lot that loops time stopped looping and returned to normal temporal flow. But when I checked my truck's clock and my phone and every external time source, they all confirmed. 43 minutes had passed since I'd pulled into parking lot, 43 minutes during which I'd experienced 17 subjective years. 17 years compressed into 43 external minutes. I'm Robert Chen, 73 years old subjectively but 56 chronologically. Having aged 17 years and 43 minutes, having lived almost 2 decades inside temporal bubble while external world advanced less than hour. My body is 73, shows wear and aging of 17 additional years, has deteriorated in ways that 43 minutes shouldn't cause. But external documentation shows I'm 56, shows only 43 minutes passed, shows no record of 17 years I experienced inside parking lot that loops time. I can't prove what happened, can't explain the aging, can't account for 17 years of memories and experiences compressed into 43 external minutes. Medical exams show body of 73-year-old in life of person whose records say 56. The discrepancy is unexplainable except by referencing temporal bubble, parking lot that loops time, duration stretched infinitely inside while compressed to nothing outside. Other drivers who escape the bubble have similar stories, similar aging discrepancies, similar gaps between subjective experience and external documentation. We're temporal refugees, people who lived stretched lives in parking lot bubble, who experienced years or decades in minutes, who aged beyond our chronological time because we were trapped where duration was flexible, where internal experience didn't match external progression. The parking lot that loops time is still there, still looks normal, still appears on GPS as regular truck stop. But the temporal bubble could reactivate any time, could trap new drivers, could stretch their duration while compressing their external time, could give them subjective years inside 43-minute parking period. If you pull into truck stop parking lot and wake to find almost no time has passed despite feeling fully rested, if you try to leave and find yourself looping back to starting position, if you see frozen people outside the bubble, if you meet other trapped drivers, understand, you're in temporal bubble experiencing stretched duration, aging normally inside while external time barely advances. You might escape after 43 minutes like I did, or you might be trapped for subjective decades like some drivers experienced. The parking lot that loops time is unpredictable, releases some drivers after brief imprisonment, traps others for entire subjective lifetimes. I experienced 17 years and 43 minutes. I'm 73 years old in 56-year-old's documented life. I'm temporal refugee who lived stretched duration, who aged beyond my chronological time, who experienced impossible compression of subjective years into external minutes. The parking lot that loops time is waiting for next driver, next victim, next person who pulls in for rest and discovers they're trapped in temporal bubble where duration stretches infinitely, where you can live years in minutes, where your subjective experience becomes decoupled from external time progression. I escaped. But I'm 17 years older, 17 years aged beyond my documented time, 17 years of experience compressed into 43 minutes that changed everything about who I am while changing almost nothing about external timeline. The parking lot that loops time is still there, still looping, still trapping, still stretching duration for unfortunate drivers who pull in without knowing they're entering temporal bubble. Don't be like me. Don't pull into parking lot that loops time. Don't risk experiencing stretched duration, compressed time, subjective years inside objective minutes. The bubble is waiting. The loop continues. The parking lot that loops time is still there, still trapping, still stretching duration infinitely while compressing it externally to almost nothing. I am Robert Chen, 73 years old, subjectively 56, chronologically temporal refugee who lived 17 years and 43 minutes inside parking lot that loops time. And I'm warning you. The bubble is still active, still waiting, still ready to trap next driver, next victim, next person who parks in wrong space and discovers they're in temporal anomaly that will age them years while advancing clock by minutes. Don't park there. Don't risk the bubble. Don't become temporal refugee like me, like hundreds of other drivers who experienced stretched duration, who lived years in minutes, who aged beyond their documented time. The parking lot that loops time is waiting. Choose your parking space carefully. Or risk experiencing what I experienced, what others experienced, what future drivers will experience when they pull into temporal bubble and discover that duration is flexible, that time can stretch and compress, that 43 minutes can contain 17 subjective years if you park in wrong space at wrong time in parking lot that loops time. Story 7. The delivery that undoes itself. I completed the delivery in Portland at 2:47 p.m., received signed confirmation from the warehouse supervisor, unloaded all 43 pallets of office furniture, closed and locked my empty trailer, and drove away feeling satisfied that another job was finished successfully. But when I stopped for fuel 30 miles later and checked my trailer, all 43 pallets were back inside, fully loaded, properly secured, exactly as they'd been before delivery, like the unloading had never happened, like the completed delivery had somehow undone itself, reversed, returned to pre-delivery state despite clear memories of warehouse supervisor signing paperwork. Despite dock workers helping unload, despite spending 90 minutes at Portland, warehouse completing delivery that had somehow reversed itself and needed to be repeated. I'm Michael Torres, 41 years old, hauling furniture from Sacramento to Portland, and the delivery that undoes itself trapped me in an impossible loop where I completed same delivery repeatedly, watched it reverse each time, drove away with empty trailer that refilled itself with cargo I'd already unloaded, forcing me to return to Portland, and repeat delivery that would undo itself again, that would reverse again, that would trap me in an endless cycle of delivery and reversal, completion and undoing, finishing job that could never stay finished. I returned to Portland warehouse, confused and frustrated, found the same supervisor who'd signed for delivery 2 hours earlier. I already delivered this cargo, I told him, showing the signed paperwork, showing the timestamp proving I'd been here at 2:47 p.m. He checked his records and frowned. According to our system, you haven't delivered anything yet. You're scheduled to deliver at 2:47 p.m., which is... He checked his watch. In 17 minutes. You're early. You'll need to wait until your scheduled time slot. I already delivered, I insisted, showing the signed documentation, showing proof of completed delivery. But when I looked at the paperwork, the signature was fading, disappearing, and within 30 seconds the delivery confirmation was blank, unsigned, showing no evidence that delivery had occurred even though I'd watched the supervisor sign it 2 hours earlier. The delivery was undoing itself, I realized, was reversing in real time, was erasing its own completion and forcing me back to pre-delivery state, back to scheduled time, back to beginning of delivery process that would complete and then undo itself and trap me in loop. At exactly 2:47 p.m. I unloaded the cargo again, watched dock workers move pallets into warehouse again, received signed confirmation from supervisor again, drove away with empty trailer again. And 30 miles later, when I checked the trailer, all 43 pallets were back inside again. Delivery had undone itself again. Cargo had magically reappeared despite being unloaded and signed for, despite completion being documented and confirmed. I was trapped in delivery loop, I understood, caught in temporal cycle where delivery completed and then reversed, where unloading was undone, where signed paperwork erased itself, where I could never actually finish the job because completion triggered reversal, because finishing initiated undoing, because delivery that completed was delivery that undid itself. I tried different approaches, delivered earlier than scheduled time, delivered later, delivered to different dock, had different supervisor signed paperwork. But every variation resulted in same outcome. Delivery completed. I drove away. Cargo reappeared in my trailer. Delivery undid itself. Loop reset to beginning. I returned to Portland to repeat identical process that would undo itself identically. Other drivers had experienced similar loops I discovered through CB conversations, through truck stop discussions, through online forums where frustrated drivers described deliveries that undid themselves, cargo that reappeared after unloading, jobs that couldn't be completed because completion triggered reversal. It's temporal cargo, one experienced driver explained. Freight that exists in quantum superposition, that's both delivered and undelivered simultaneously, that can't be permanently unloaded because it's locked in state of perpetual delivery. Some cargo is normal, some is temporal, and temporal cargo traps drivers in loops where delivery undoes itself, where job can never be completed, where you're permanently stuck delivering same freight to same location in endless cycle. How do I break the loop? I asked desperately, having repeated Portland delivery 14 times now, having driven away with empty trailer 14 times, having discovered fully loaded trailer 14 times, having returned to Portland 14 times to repeat delivery that would undo itself again. You don't break it, he said grimly. You either abandon the cargo, which triggers breach of contract, financial penalties, possible criminal charges, or you continue the loop forever, permanently delivering temporal freight that undoes itself, forever trapped in delivery cycle that has no completion, no end, no escape except abandonment with severe consequences. I continued the loop because I couldn't afford the penalties, couldn't risk criminal charges, couldn't abandon cargo even though delivering it was impossible. Even though completion triggered reversal, even though I was trapped in temporal cycle that had no resolution. I've completed the Portland delivery 647 times now, or maybe 6,000 times. I've lost count because the loop has continued for subjective months, maybe years. Time becoming uncertain when you're repeating same actions endlessly, when every delivery undoes itself, when loop resets constantly. I'm Michael Torres, 41 years old, permanently stuck delivering office furniture from Sacramento to Portland, permanently trapped in loop where delivery undoes itself, permanently repeating same job that can never be completed because completion triggers reversal, because finishing initiates undoing, because temporal cargo exists in state of perpetual delivery that makes actual unloading impossible. Other drivers are trapped in similar loops with their own temporal cargo, all of us permanently delivering freight that undoes itself, all repeating identical deliveries endlessly, all stuck in jobs that can't be completed because completion isn't possible with temporal cargo, with freight that exists in quantum superposition of delivered and undelivered, with loads that undo themselves and force endless repetition. If your assigned cargo described as temporal freight or quantum superposition delivery, or anything suggesting the load exists in multiple states simultaneously, refuse the job. Don't haul temporal cargo. Don't trap yourself in delivery loop where completion triggers reversal, where unloading is undone, where you'll repeat same delivery forever because temporal freight can't be permanently delivered, can't be actually unloaded, can't be truly completed. I accepted temporal cargo without understanding implications. Now I'm permanently trapped delivering it, permanently repeating Portland delivery, permanently experiencing completion that undoes itself and forces another repetition, another loop, another identical delivery that will undo itself identically. The delivery that undoes itself is my permanent job now, my eternal assignment, my infinite loop where I unload 43 pallets, drive away with empty trailer, discover fully loaded trailer, return to Portland, repeat process endlessly because temporal cargo can't be permanently delivered, because quantum superposition freight undoes its own completion, because I'm trapped forever in job that has no finish, no end, no escape except abandonment I can't afford. I am Michael Torres. I am permanent delivery driver. I am trapped in loop where delivery undoes itself. I am repeating Portland delivery for eternity because temporal cargo makes completion impossible, makes finishing trigger reversal, makes every delivery undo itself and force repetition. The loop continues, the delivery reverses, the cargo reappears, the cycle repeats. Forever. I'm still delivering, still undoing, still trapped, still repeating. The delivery that undoes itself is eternal. I'm its permanent driver, and I'll be delivering office furniture from Sacramento to Portland forever, watching each delivery undo itself, experiencing each completion reverse, trapped in temporal loop that has no resolution, no end, no escape. Forever delivering, forever undoing, forever trapped. That's my life now. That's my eternal assignment. That's the consequence of accepting temporal cargo, of delivering freight that undoes itself, of being trapped in loop where completion is impossible because finishing triggers reversal that resets everything back to beginning. The delivery that undoes itself continues. I'm still trapped, still repeating, still delivering freight that reappears after unloading. Still completing job that undoes itself, still living in temporal loop where delivery is eternal because completion is impossible. Forever. Story 8. The weigh station where they weigh your life. The digital scale at the weigh station read, life weight 127 pounds, insufficient. See attendant when I drove my truck across it, and I understood immediately this wasn't measuring my vehicle's cargo but something deeper, something more fundamental. The weight of my life, the substance of my existence, the accumulated value of my choices and experiences and impacts translated into pounds on a scale that judged whether I'd lived sufficiently, whether my life had enough weight to pass inspection, whether I was heavy enough with meaning and purpose and significance to be cleared for continued travel. I'm William Foster, 62 years old, hauling medical supplies from Boston to Cleveland, and the weigh station where they weigh your life determined I was insufficient. Determined my existence lacked substance. Determined at 62 years old I hadn't accumulated enough life weight to meet minimum requirements, that I needed to add meaning, add purpose, add significance until my life weighed more, until I passed inspection, until I was heavy enough with experience and impact to be cleared for continued existence on the highway and in the world. The attendant who approached my truck was ageless, might have been 30 or 80, his face shifting subtly as I looked at him, never settling into definite age or expression. His name tag read Life Inspector 7, and he carried clipboard that showed my life weight breakdown. Relationships 23 pounds, career achievement 19 pounds, personal growth 31 pounds, impact on others 28 pounds, joy experienced 14 pounds, suffering survived 12 pounds, total life weight 127 pounds, minimum required 150 pounds, deficit 23 pounds, status insufficient. You're underweight, Mr. Foster, the inspector said, his voice carrying no judgment, just clinical assessment. At 62 years old, we expect life weight of at least 150 pounds, preferably more. You're 23 pounds short. You'll need to add substance to your life before you can be cleared for continued travel. How do I add life weight? I asked. The question absurd but necessary. The premise impossible but clearly real given the scale and inspector and official-looking paperwork documenting my insufficient existence. Live more substantially, he explained. Form deeper relationships. Make greater impact. Experience more joy, survive more challenges. Convert your remaining time into meaningful weight by choosing actions that add substance rather than empty activities that contribute nothing to your life's mass. Every significant choice, every meaningful relationship, every moment of genuine impact adds weight. Empty time, shallow interactions, superficial experiences add nothing. You need 23 more pounds of life weight before you can proceed. He directed me to a parking area where other insufficient drivers waited, all of us underweight, all needing to add life substance before passing inspection, all forced to remain at weigh station until we accumulated enough significance to meet minimum requirements. I met other drivers in the parking area, some only slightly underweight, needing just few pounds of life substance to pass inspection. Others were severely deficient, needing 50 or 100 pounds, requiring massive life changes and significant impacts to reach minimum weight. An elderly woman named Margaret had been at the weigh station for 3 years, adding weight slowly through relationships formed with other waiting drivers, through volunteering at local facilities, through converting her detention time into meaningful experiences that added substance to her life. I arrived with 98 pounds at age 74, she explained. I need 150 minimum, so I need 52 more pounds. I've added 31 pounds in 3 years through relationships and service and growth. 21 more pounds and I can leave, can pass inspection, can continue to my destination and my death, which is my actual destination since I'm 77 now and probably don't have many years left. But I can't die until I pass inspection. Can't leave this weigh station until my life weighs enough. until I've accumulated sufficient substance to be cleared for conclusion. The weigh station where they weigh your life was permanent detention until you added sufficient substance, I realized, was checkpoint that prevented continued existence until you'd lived meaningfully enough, accumulated enough weight through experiences and relationships and impacts and growth. You couldn't die with insufficient life weight. You were stuck at the weigh station adding substance until you reached minimum requirement. Until your life weighed enough to pass inspection, until you'd lived sufficiently to be cleared for continued journey toward wherever you were going, including death itself. I started adding life weight deliberately, strategically, focusing on activities that added substance. I formed relationships with other detained drivers, deep friendships that added weight. I volunteered at facilities near the weigh station, contributed meaningfully to others' lives, added impact weight. I confronted my own failures and fears, grew personally, added personal development weight. Every meaningful choice added grams or ounces or pounds to my life's mass, slowly increasing my total weight toward the minimum requirement. The weigh station's life inspector checked my progress weekly, rolling my truck back across the scale, measuring updated life weight. 132 pounds, 139 pounds, 144 pounds, 148 pounds. Each weigh-in showed progress, showed substance accumulating, showed my life growing heavier with meaning and significance and impact. After 7 months at the weigh station, my life weight finally reached 151 pounds, 1 pound over minimum requirement, barely sufficient but technically adequate. The inspector cleared me for continued travel, handed me certification showing I'd achieved minimum life weight, allowed me to leave the weigh station and continue toward Cleveland and beyond, toward whatever remained of my journey now that I'd been detained for 7 months, adding substance to insufficient life. I'm William Foster, 62 years old chronologically, but 63 by the time I left the weigh station. Having spent 7 months adding 24 pounds of life weight, having converted detention time into meaningful substance, having grown relationships in impact and personal development, until my life weighed enough to pass inspection, until my existence met minimum requirements for continued travel. The weigh station where they weigh your life is operational on multiple highways, randomly positioned, waiting for drivers whose lives lack sufficient substance, whose existence is underweight, whose accumulated meaning falls below minimum requirements. Some drivers pass easily, lives heavy with relationships and impact and growth. Others are detained for months or years, forced to add weight, required to live more substantially before being cleared for continued travel. If you encounter weigh station measuring life weight rather than cargo weight, if scale shows your existence is insufficient, if inspector determines you're underweight, don't panic. Use detention time meaningfully. Form relationships. Make impact. Grow personally. Add substance to your life through deliberate, significant choices rather than empty, superficial activities. I was detained for 7 months. I added 24 pounds of life weight. I passed inspection and was cleared for continued travel. And I'm living differently now, choosing substance over convenience, impact over ease, meaningful relationships over superficial interactions. Deliberately adding weight to my life rather than letting it remain light and insufficient. The weigh station where they weigh your life is waiting for drivers whose existence lacks substance, whose lives are underweight, whose accumulated meaning falls below minimum. Don't be like I was. 62 years old with only 127 pounds of life weight, insufficient underweight, requiring 7 months of detention to add enough substance to pass inspection. Live heavily. Accumulate weight. Choose substance. Make impact. Grow meaningfully. Build relationships. Experience deeply. Ensure your life weighs enough that when you reach the weigh station, you pass inspection, meet minimum requirements, are cleared for continued travel toward your destination, whether that's Cleveland or death or wherever your journey leads. I passed inspection at 151 pounds, barely sufficient. I'm adding weight continuously now, living more substantially, ensuring I never again fall below minimum, never again risk detention at weigh station where they measure life weight and detain insufficient drivers until they've lived meaningfully enough to pass. The weigh station where they weigh your life is waiting. Live heavily enough to pass inspection, accumulate sufficient substance, meet minimum requirements, or be detained until you do. Story 9. The Final Mile. Every trucker knows about the final mile, the legendary stretch of highway where your driving career ends, where you make your last delivery, where you drive your last route before retirement or death or whatever conclusion awaits drivers who've spent their lives on the road. But I didn't know the final mile was an actual place, an actual stretch of highway you could accidentally drive onto. An actual location where driving careers ended permanently. Where truckers who entered never left, never returned, never completed their final mile because the final mile was eternal, was infinite, was last stretch of highway that lasted forever without destination, without completion, without end. I'm James Patterson, 69 years old, driving for 47 years, and I entered the final mile on December 23, 2023, expecting it to be metaphor or legend or story truckers told each other, not understanding it was real place, real highway, real final destination where career drivers ended their journeys not through arrival but through eternal continuation of final mile that never finished, never concluded, never allowed you to complete your last delivery or retire peacefully or die naturally. Because final mile was infinite, was perpetual, was highway that had no mile marker 2 because mile marker 1 extended forever. Because final mile was all miles compressed into one eternal stretch that you drove forever without progressing, without finishing, without escape. The entrance appeared on I-80 in Nebraska, simple exit marked, final mile, career completion, all drivers welcome. And I took it because after 47 years of driving, I was ready for completion, ready for conclusion, ready for final delivery that would end my career and let me retire with satisfaction that I'd completed my professional journey, that I'd driven my final mile successfully, that I'd concluded my trucking life properly. The highway beyond the exit was beautiful, perfect pavement, ideal conditions, scenic landscape, everything a driver could want for final journey. Mile marker 0 stood at the entrance, indicating beginning of final mile. And mile marker 1 was visible in the distance, clear destination, achievable goal, end point where my driving career would conclude and my retirement would begin. But I never reached mile marker 1. I drove for what felt like hours, maintaining steady speed, watching the marker remain visible in the distance but never getting closer. Never approaching, never arriving. The final mile was longer than 1 mile, I realized, was stretched, was infinite. Was optical illusion where destination remained visible but unreachable, where you could see the end but never arrive at it, where mile marker 1 was like horizon, always visible, always distant, always 1 mile away no matter how far you drove. Other trucks were on the final mile with me, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all driving toward mile marker 1, all maintaining steady speed, all never arriving, all trapped in final mile that extended infinitely, that stretched perpetually, that kept destination visible but unreachable. I tried to stop, to turn around, to exit the final mile and return to normal highways, but the road had no shoulders, no exits, no way to turn around, just perfect pavement extending forward toward mile marker 1 that never got closer. Toward destination you could see but never reach. Toward completion that remained perpetually 1 mile away. The CB radio filled with voices of other final mile drivers, all of us sharing frustration and resignation. Been driving final mile for 3 years, never reaching mile marker 1, never completing journey, never finishing career. Final mile is infinite. Mile marker 1 is unreachable. We're trapped driving final mile forever, seeing destination but never arriving, approaching conclusion but never completing. I checked my fuel gauge, still full despite hours of driving. Checked my odometer, still showing same mileage as when I entered final mile. Checked my clock, frozen at the moment I took the exit. Time stopped or looped or irrelevant on highway where space was infinite and destination was unreachable and final mile lasted forever. I am James Patterson, 69 years old, been driving for 47 years, currently on my final mile, currently driving toward mile marker 1 that I'll never reach, currently trapped in conclusion that never concludes, in final journey that never finishes, in last mile that extends infinitely. I'm still driving, still approaching mile marker 1, still seeing it clearly in distance, still never getting closer, still trapped on final mile where career completion is visible but unreachable, where driving career ends not through arrival but through eternal approach toward destination you'll never reach, toward conclusion that remains perpetually 1 mile away, toward mile marker 1 that exists but can't be arrived at, because final mile is infinite and destination is optical illusion and completion is impossible. If you see exit marked final mile or career completion or last delivery, don't take it. Don't enter the highway where driving careers end through eternal continuation rather than actual completion, where final mile extends infinitely, where you'll drive forever approaching mile marker 1 without ever arriving, without ever finishing, without ever completing your final journey. I'm still driving, still on my final mile, still approaching the unreachable destination, still trapped in conclusion that never concludes. Forever driving, forever approaching, forever 1 mile from completion. Forever on the final mile that lasts forever, that never ends, that keeps destination visible but unreachable. Completion imaginable but impossible, arrival theoretically 1 mile away but actually infinitely distant. The final mile is eternal. I'm driving it now, I'll drive it forever. Mile marker 1 remains visible, remains 1 mile away, remains unreachable. That's the final mile. That's where driving careers end. That's where I am now, where I'll be forever, driving final mile that never finishes, approaching destination I'll never reach, completing journey that can't be completed. Still driving, still approaching, still on the final mile forever.